My anatomy professor is a necrophiliac. I, female 24, have an anatomy professor, age unknown, who is a necrophiliac. I am a second-year medical student attending a famed grad school that I will not name for obvious reasons. I worked my ass off to be accepted to this academy, spending my undergrad with my head buried in the books rather than enjoying my college experience like the rest of my peers. I was not brought up in a family of wealth. My parents are immigrants from Honduras and could never afford to send me to community college, let alone my state's top private university. They did, however, instill hard-working values that allowed me to work hard and never doubt myself. I managed to gain a few scholarships that granted me just enough funds to make it through my first 4 years. I may be a smart cookie in retrospect, but I needed a perfect grade point average if I was ever going to get into my dream med school. I am ashamed to say this, but I did everything in my power to get where I am today. That includes downing a half bottle of Adderall every week. I know what you may be thinking. Some hard worker can't even make it through her undergrad without performance enhancers. And you're probably right. There is nothing that you could say to me that I haven't already said in the mirror. I am a slimeball, but those judging me right now will feel vindicated when I tell you that my sins are currently being punished. In my first year of grad school, I was introduced to Dr. Welsh, the head of my school's anatomy department. I'll never forget the first day he walked into class, his head held high, walking through the door in a confident stride, and touting a luscious gray mane that complemented his wrinkles. It is not an uncommon thing for a man of such distinction to feel himself like this, but it is strange to see this level of cockiness in a man his age. It is for me anyway. Most of the men his age that I've met have more tempered personalities. They do not smirk at younger women like he did to me on that day. As he placed his tote bag on his desk, he carefully scanned the room, as if searching for someone he'd lost. The hairs on the back of my head stand when his eyes lock on me. His deep amber-colored eyes peered at me through his overgrown brow whiskers, and the ends of his mouth crinkled as his lips parted in a devilish grin. I'll tell you right now that at that moment, I should have packed my things and run for the hills. Becoming a lawyer sounds more appealing right now than having to deal with the bullshit I've endured. I, however, did not run, and his smirk was brushed off when I decided to look around the room. As a Latina woman, sitting in a class of mostly non-minority men, I must have stuck out like a sore thumb. When my eyes returned to him, the focus of his eyes had shifted to the collective body. Welcome to Foundations of Anatomy. I am your Professor Dr. Welsh, the man joyously announced from the head of the class. Turning to the whiteboard, he writes out his name. Dr. Elise Welsh, M.D., Ph.D. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't for the life of me attribute the name to anything. For the rest of the introductory class, I would see him periodically glance over at me, a twinkle always present in his eye. For those unfamiliar with the inner workings of a medical school term, it is mind-numbingly fast-paced. We have 8-week terms, with a credit load equivalent to 26 per semester. All of the courses are extremely hard: microbiology, pathophysiology, anatomy, medical terminology, etc. It is safe to say that my dependence on my pills was not going anywhere soon. Now, anatomy in med school takes place in an actual lab and students dissect real-life cadavers. Our school has a state-of-the-art anatomy lab, one where any grad student or full-fledged doctors can walk in during operating hours to study or practice on the specimens. You didn't think that doctors practice their skills on live people, did you? Well, they don't. The donor bodies serve a wonderful purpose, and all the thousands of hours students work on their corpses save countless lives. For our weekly mandatory lab time, the Foundations of Anatomy class will meet in the cadaver lab. We all come dressed in our scrubs, so there is no need for a grand locker room, but there are designated cubby slots that serve the purpose of housing our miscellaneous items: watches, phones, wallets, and in my case, my jar of pills. I know I should just leave them at home, but I always get anxious about needing them. What if I get a pop quiz or something and am too tired to function? Coffee will not do the trick. And besides, the focus you get while on Adderall is insane. You wouldn't understand unless you've used them. I stripped my coat off and slid it into my cubby. Just as I did so, the pill bottle fell from the side pocket. Dr. Welsh just so happened to be walking by at that second, the bottle coming to rest on the tip of his foot. I darted to pick it up, but he beat me to it. Grasping the bottle at eye level, he read the inscription on the label and gave me a mischievous smile. He handed the bottle over to me and bent over to whisper in my ear, "Mr. Smith, come see me in my office after class." My heart was pounding out of my chest. You see, the name on the bottle carried the name of the kid I buy the pills from. Some D-bag on frat row. Why didn't I peel the label off? Well, my logic is that a pill bottle with a peeled label looks more suspicious than one with the label intact. I could have carried them in some Tylenol bottle, but this is med school. We learn to identify medications. The neon blue pills are clearly not Tylenol, so that would be a surefire way of getting caught if someone just so happens to see me pop one. This way, I could just pass the pill off as just some generic antibiotic for some common infection. After all, who snatches someone's pills to read the label? Since Dr. Welsh is the department head, his office is just next to the anatomy lab. Walking into the room, I fully expected to see the dean of the university waiting along with Dr. Welsh, ready to expel me. To my surprise, Dr. Welsh sat reclined in his chair, a small white paper resting atop his empty desk. He bent forward and slid it over to me. It was a prescription for my favorite blue pills. My eyes shot up to meet his face. He gave me a creepy wink that made me squirm. "Ms. Gonzalez," he called out as I snatched the paper and attempted to scurry out of the room without so much as a thank you. What can I say? My brain spasmed in that instance, and I forgot all manner of conversational conventions. My knees shaking at what the doctor might say, I slowly pivoted as I attempted to compose myself. His hands clasped together, the doctor calmly states, "Ms. Gonzalez, this is a favor that does not come without a price." He looked me up and down, head to toe. My skin broke out in goosebumps. Dr. Welsh pulled out a picture frame from the drawer of his desk. Slowly turning it towards me, my face dropped. It was a black and white picture of me grasping the arm of a handsome young man. "This is a picture of me and my wife long before she passed," the doctor explained. Upon closer inspection, the features of the man before me did look like the smooth, youthful face of the man in the picture. And the woman, well, she looked uncannily similar to me. No wonder he always ogled me the way he did. "I want to show you something. If you would be able to indulge this old man, it would make me the happiest person in the world." His eyes filled with tears as his tone changed to one of a beggar. I nodded in the affirmative, and his face lit up in joy as he wiped the tears with his sleeve. "I want you to meet me in the cadaver lab, just after 10 p.m. After the lab closed to the public. After seeing the pain in the man's eyes, I couldn't refuse. And if I did refuse, the man had a way of blackmailing me. One email to the dean about my drug habit, and I'd be scrambling to pay the mountain of student loan debt with no way of doing so. I was forced to agree. It was strange seeing the anatomy lab after hours. Usually the lab is lit with heavy fluorescent lighting. Today only the emergency fire lights flickered. The anatomy lab was always cold, but in the dim light it felt so much more icy. As the heavy lab door creaked, I walked into the large room. Dr. Welsh awaited me under one of the few lamp-like lights of the lab. He waved me over and patted me on the shoulder, suggesting I follow him. He led me into the cooler room, a morgue-like space that housed most of the university's specimens. Walking past all of the refrigerator doors, we reached the end of the room, a door with a plaque reading, "Dr. Welsh was protected by a padlock." The doctor fiddled with the collection of keys on his lanyard, finally finding the right one, inserting it into the keyhole, and unlatching the pad. The door swung open and the doctor rolled out the metal examination table. The specimen was draped in a large white cloth. Dr. Welsh stepped aside and gestured for me to examine the specimen. I hesitantly stepped forward. The dead don't scare me, but you gotta admit, given the circumstances, any reasonable person would be creeped out as hell. I gripped the edge of the white cloth, ready for the smell of formaldehyde to hit my nostrils. But as I pulled back the first bit of the sheet, I was met with a donor, an old woman that looked unprepared, or not yet chemically tampered with. I turned back to Dr. Welsh, and he raised his hand, palm facing the ceiling, gliding it down to the foot of the cadaver. I understood and ripped the cover off the corpse. When I tell you that I almost vomited, I don't say that lightly. The specimen was more homunculus than human. Its face was that of a sweet, innocent woman. But just below the throat is where the horror started. The head was stitched onto a youthful torso with pristine, perfect skin and breasts. Its arms were sectioned, and you could easily tell that many different ethnic backgrounds made up its limbs. The appendages were not even of equal length. It was grotesque, ungodly, inhuman. Then it dawned on me. I remembered where I heard Dr. Elise Welsh mention before. I don't know if you remember a horrific news story from 2013-2014 about a research facility in Arizona, where the facility was raided by the FBI after an investigation discovered bodies stitched together. The facility members defiled the donor bodies and created all sorts of monstrosities. While Dr. Welsh was not mentioned on the national news, the local news reported him as the director of the facility. I attended my undergrad in that area and was privy to the news headlines. I quickly shot my head around towards the doctor. "You?" I said, stunned. "You are the Dr. Elise Welsh?" So many questions ran through my head. How is he not in jail? Why is he still the director of anything? This man is a monster. The man gave me a smile and responded with a confirmation. Me. Just as I was about to erupt into a sprint, a cold hand clasped my wrist. I turned to the homunculus to see the old woman's eyes open. Just then I felt Dr. Welsh's arms snake around me, grabbing me by the cheeks. "Look, honey," speaking to the abomination, forcing me to look at the monster. "She's perfect, isn't she? She looked just like you when we met." The monster stretched the longer of her two arms and caressed my face. "She's perfect," it said in a smoker's scratchy voice. The memory of the black and white picture Dr. Welsh showed me flashed back into my mind, and I wanted to scream at the realization of who this was and what they intended to do with me. My face was going to be added to the monster's collection of parts. Dr. Welsh spun me around and looked intently into my eyes. "She is, isn't she?" His eyes full of love, he did not break connection with mine. Seconds turned into minutes, and I could almost see the memories playing in the doctor's eyes. "Elise! Elise! Elise!" The homunculus called, but nothing could snap the doctor out of his trance. Finally, he forced my lips into a pucker and planted a nasty, wet kiss on my mouth. "Elise!" his wife called out for a final time. I tried to push the man off, but he was too strong. I heard the sound of naked flesh hitting the ground, but I could not turn to look. It felt like an eternity, but the doctor finally let go. The sound of flesh being sliced echoed through the large room. The homunculus had made its way over to the tool cabinet, pulled out a large scalpel, and sliced into the doctor's Achilles, causing him to fall to the ground. The two now lay at my feet. "Honey?" Dr. Welsh questioned. The homunculus fought back tears, and in a quivering voice said, "You told me you would never kiss another woman, not again." Dr. Welsh smiled and responded, "But she is not another woman, she is you." Elise lovingly grasped the back of his wife's head, and for a second, all transgressions seemed to be forgiven. That is, until the abomination lifted the scalpel and plunged it into the doctor's chest, over and over again, blanketing the ground in a pool of crimson. Elise gave his final breath, coughing out a clot of blood in the process. Ms. Welsh then turned to me. "You!" she grunted through a waterfall of tears. "You damn whore! You ruined everything." Turning the scalpel on herself, she ripped the stitches on her neck wide open, letting out a blood-curdling howl through her trachea. I stood there in shock. Only the buzzing of the fluorescent lights sounded. I was finally snapped out of it when I heard the sound of liquid reaching the floor drain. Blood had found its escape, and it was my turn to do the same. I grabbed my things and ran from campus. I booked the first flight out of the country. Just so happens that the first flight available was Honduras. Funny how things work out. Expecting some news channel to pick up the tragedy, I was glued to the TV for days. But days turned into weeks, weeks to months, and nothing came to light. You would think the world would be itching for a news story such as this. But all was quiet. Maybe the university orchestrated some kind of cover-up. Who knows? Not my circus, not my monkey. I'm just glad they didn't find a way to blame me for what happened.